Emily Peterson stood in the kitchen, her hands methodically slicing strawberries for the girls' breakfast. The morning sunlight poured through the wide bay window, painting the room in warm golden hues. It was one of those moments that looked perfect. A cozy home, a delicious breakfast on the table, and the sound of her daughters, Mia and Sophie, laughing in the next room. But something felt off. David walked in, already dressed for work in his crisp suit. He leaned down, kissing her cheek with practiced ease. "Morning," he said, his voice steady but distant. Emily glanced up at him, trying to catch his eyes. "You're heading in early again?" David straightened, adjusting his tie. "Big case. You know how it is." She nodded, forcing a smile. She did know. For years, she'd accepted his long hours and the occasional missed dinner, but lately his late nights had become more frequent, his excuses more vague. "Do you have time for breakfast?" she asked, gesturing to the table. He hesitated, glancing at his watch. "Sorry, I really can't. I'll grab something on the way." Emily bit the inside of her cheek to keep from responding. Instead, she picked up the plate of toast and set it on the table for the girls. "Daddy's leaving already?" Sophie piped up, her big eyes staring at David. David crouched down, ruffling her hair. "I'll see you tonight, okay? Be good for your mom." As he stood to leave, Emily followed him to the door. She watched as he grabbed his briefcase, his movements quick and deliberate. "David," she said softly, her voice catching him just before he opened the door. "Is everything okay?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," she said, crossing her arms. "You've just seemed distracted lately." David sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Emily, it's work. That's all. You're overthinking." Before she could respond, he kissed her on the forehead and stepped out, closing the door behind him. Emily stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he'd been. Her chest felt tight, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. Was she overthinking? Or was there something he wasn't telling her? The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine, packing lunches, school drop-offs, errands, and cleaning. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, David's detached demeanor lingered in her thoughts. By evening, as she tucked the girls into bed, her unease had only grown. After the house grew quiet, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting shadows across the room. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her messages, her social media feed, anything that might give her a clue about David's recent behavior. Nothing. The silence of the house felt oppressive. Just as she was about to head to bed, the doorbell rang. Emily froze. It was nearly 10 p.m., too late for a neighborly visit. She set down her glass and walked cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the porch. Tall and broad-shouldered, he was wearing a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the shadows. "Mrs. Peterson?" he called, his voice calm but commanding. Emily hesitated before unlocking the door, opening it just enough to see him clearly. "Yes? Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour," the man said, his tone measured. "But it's important. I need to talk to you about your husband." Her heart skipped a beat. "What about him?" The man reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He held it out to her, his expression unreadable. "Read this," he said. "It'll explain everything." Emily stared at the envelope, her fingers twitching at her sides. "Who are you?" "That's not important right now," he replied. "But trust me, you'll want to see what's inside." Before she could ask anything else, he turned and walked down the porch steps, disappearing into the night. Emily stood there, the envelope heavy in her hand. For a moment, she debated whether to open it. But the curiosity and the fear was too strong to resist. She stepped back inside, locking the door behind her. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It was David, sitting in a cafe with the man who had just been at her door. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking her husband's face. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago, a night David had claimed he was working late. Emily's stomach churned as she stared at the image. The man's words echoed in her mind. "You'll want to see what's inside." What did this stranger know about her husband? And why hadn't David told her the truth? The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like an unwelcome guest. Emily had stared at the photograph for what felt like hours, her mind racing with questions. The man at the door, the cryptic message. What did it all mean? And why had David lied? The next morning, the usual rhythm of their home felt strained. The girls were chattering over breakfast, their voices a comforting backdrop, but Emily's focus was elsewhere. She watched David as he sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. David, she began cautiously, keeping her voice even. Do you have time to talk before you leave today? He glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Sure. What's up? Emily hesitated, glancing toward the girls. Later, she said, nodding toward them. When they're at school. David raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. All right, he said, returning to his phone. The drive to school was uneventful, but Emily's heart pounded the entire way home. As soon as she stepped into the house, David was waiting for her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. All right, Emily, he said, his tone calm but slightly guarded. What's this about? Emily took a deep breath, pulling the photograph from her pocket. She slid it onto the counter between them. This, she said simply. David's face tightened as he looked at the image. For a moment, he said nothing, his jaw clenching slightly. Where did you get this? He asked finally, his voice low. A man came to the house last night, Emily said, watching him carefully. He gave it to me and told me I needed to know the truth about you. Who is he, David? And why are you meeting him? David's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He's no one important, David said, his tone dismissive. Just someone I used to work with. David, Emily said firmly, stepping closer. Don't do that. Don't brush this off like it's nothing. Who is he, and why is he showing up at our house? David sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said, his tone softening. His name is Alex Carter. He was a client years ago before I met you. Things didn't end well between us, and now he's holding a grudge. Emily stared at him, her stomach tightening. What kind of grudge, David? He hesitated, and that hesitation felt like a knife twisting in her chest. It's complicated, he said finally. But it's nothing for you to worry about. I'll handle it. Handle it? Emily repeated, her voice rising slightly. David, this man came to our home. He knew my name. He handed me a photograph of you two together. This isn't something you can just brush under the rug. I said I'll handle it, David snapped, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. He immediately softened, stepping toward her. Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to raise my voice, but you have to trust me on this. I can take care of it. Emily took a step back, shaking her head. How can I trust you when you won't tell me the whole truth? What aren't you saying, David? David opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen, and something in his expression shifted. Tension, maybe even fear. I have to go, he said quickly, grabbing his phone and his briefcase. We'll talk about this later. David? Emily called after him, but he was already out the door. Emily stood there, her chest heaving with frustration and anxiety. She picked up her phone and stared at the photograph again. If David wouldn't give her answers, she'd have to find them herself. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Emily couldn't focus on anything, her errands, her work, even the girls' homework after school. Her mind kept returning to David's evasive answers and that man, Alex Carter. Who was he? Really? And what did he want? That evening, after the girls were asleep, Emily sat by the fireplace, her laptop open on her lap. She typed Alex Carter into the search bar, hoping for some kind of clue. What she found made her blood run cold. Alex Carter wasn't just a disgruntled client. He had a criminal record. Fraud, extortion, even accusations of blackmail. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Mrs. Peterson, the voice on the other end said, smooth and familiar. It was Alex. How did you get my number? Emily demanded, her voice trembling. That doesn't matter, Alex said. What matters is that I'm giving you a chance to learn the truth about your husband. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Greenview Cafe, alone. Why should I? Emily asked, her heart racing. Because, Alex said, his tone almost amused, you already know he's lying. Don't you want to know why? The line went dead before she could respond. Emily stared at her phone, her hands shaking. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for sure. Alex Carter wasn't going away anytime soon. The Greenview Cafe was bustling when Emily arrived. The hum of conversation, and the clinking of coffee cups blending into a comforting din. But comfort was the last thing she felt as she spotted Alex Carter sitting at a corner table by the window. He was nursing a black coffee, his sharp gaze fixed on the door as if he'd been expecting her. Emily took a deep breath and approached, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. Alex looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, standing and pulling out a chair for her. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm not here for pleasantries," Emily said curtly, taking the seat. "What do you want from me?" Alex chuckled, sitting back down. "Straight to the point. I respect that." He slid a manila folder across the table. Emily eyed it warily but didn't touch it. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof," Alex said, his voice low. "Your husband isn't the man you think he is." Emily's stomach churned. "You keep saying that. Why don't you stop with the cryptic games and tell me exactly what you mean?" Alex leaned forward, his expression serious now. "David and I go way back. 10 years ago, he worked on a case that destroyed my life. He promised to protect me, to help me walk away clean, and instead, he handed me over to the wolves." Emily's brows furrowed. "You're saying he betrayed you?" "Not just me," Alex said. "Others too. But I'm the one left picking up the pieces. And now, he thinks he can just bury the past and pretend it never happened." Emily shook her head. "That doesn't sound like David," Alex smirked. "Of course it doesn't. You've been living in the world he created for you, a nice little suburban fantasy. But the man you married, he's not who you think he is." Emily felt anger bubbling up. "You're making a lot of accusations without any real proof." "Then look in the folder," Alex said, leaning back in his chair. "See for yourself." Reluctantly, Emily opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of legal documents, financial transactions, and correspondence. Her eyes scanned the pages, her heart sinking as she began to recognize David's handwriting and signature. "This doesn't prove anything," she said, her voice shaking. "It proves enough," Alex countered. "David profited from that case in ways that weren't exactly legal. And now I'm here to collect what I'm owed." Emily's eyes narrowed. "So this is about money?" Alex shrugged. "Partly, but it's also about justice. I lost everything because of him. My career, my reputation, my freedom. He owes me. And you think dragging his wife into this will help?" Emily snapped. "I'm not your leverage." Alex's smile returned, colder this time. "Maybe not, but you're smart enough to know the truth when you see it. And I think you're starting to see it now." Emily closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "If you have a problem with David, take it up with him. Leave me and my family out of it." Alex chuckled again, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I plan to. But you should know something, Mrs. Peterson. David's lies aren't just his problem anymore. They're yours too." Emily stood, her hands trembling as she grabbed her purse. "Stay away from me, and stay away from my family." As she turned to leave, Alex called after her. "You can't outrun the truth, Emily. Sooner or later, it catches up with everyone." Emily didn't stop. She pushed through the cafe door and out into the cool afternoon air, her mind racing. The documents in that folder were damning, but she couldn't believe David was capable of what Alex claimed. Could he? By the time she got home, Emily felt like a live wire, her nerves frayed and her thoughts tangled. She found David in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of wine. "You're home early," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Emily set her purse down on the counter, her jaw tight. "I saw Alex Carter today." David froze, the glass halfway to his lips. "You? What?" "He asked me to meet him," Emily said, her voice sharp. "He gave me this." She pulled the manila folder from her bag and dropped it on the counter. David stared at it, his face pale. "Emily, I can explain." "Don't," she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. "Don't lie to me again. Just tell me the truth." David set the glass down, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't want you involved in this," he said finally. "I thought I could handle it on my own." "Handle what?" Emily demanded. "What did you do, David?" "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice low. "Big ones. But everything I did to protect us, to protect you and the girls." Emily felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "Protect us? By lying to me? By dragging our family into this mess?" David looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Emily, please, just give me a chance to fix this." She shook her head, stepping back. "I don't even know who you are anymore." As she turned and walked out of the room, David's voice followed her. "Emily, wait." But she didn't stop. She needed space, time to think. and she needed to figure out if the man she trusted with her life was really the person she thought he was. Emily spent the next day in a fog, replaying David's words over and over in her mind. He had admitted to mistakes, but what did that even mean? And why hadn't he trusted her enough to tell her the truth from the start? Every glance at her daughters brought a fresh wave of anxiety. How could she protect them from something she didn't fully understand? That afternoon, she called Kate Thompson, the private investigator she'd reluctantly contacted a week earlier when her suspicions about David first began. Kate had seemed skeptical at first, but when Emily mentioned Alex Carter, her tone had shifted. "Mrs. Peterson," Kate said when she answered, "I was just about to call you." Emily frowned. "Why? Did you find something?" "Plenty," Kate replied. "And none of it is good. Can you meet me?" An hour later, Emily found herself sitting across from Kate in a small office above a coffee shop. Kate was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She slid a folder across the desk toward Emily, much like Alex had done, but this time Emily didn't hesitate to open it. "These are financial records," Kate began. "David has been making payments to Alex Carter for months, quietly, through an untraceable account. It's clear he's trying to keep this off the books." Emily's heart sank as she scanned the documents. "He told me he was protecting us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kate leaned back in her chair. "He might believe that, but it's more complicated than that. Alex Carter isn't just blackmailing David. He's got connections, dangerous ones." Emily looked up, her eyes narrowing. "What kind of connections?" Kate hesitated. "Organized crime. Small time, mostly, but still enough to make trouble. Carter's been involved in fraud, extortion, and money laundering for years. And from what I can tell, David got tangled up with him during a case he worked on about a decade ago." Emily felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What kind of case?" Kate flipped through her notes. David was representing a whistleblower, a corporate employee who wanted to expose some shady dealings in their company. Carter was part of the cover-up. The whistleblower disappeared, the case fell apart, and Carter ended up taking the heat. Emily closed her eyes, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "So now he's blaming David." "Exactly," Kate said. "And he's using whatever leverage he has to squeeze him." Emily looked up, determination hardening her expression. "How do I stop this? How do I protect my family?" Kate leaned forward, her voice low. "First, you need to confront David again. But this time, you need all the facts. Don't let him dodge your questions." Emily nodded, clutching the folder tightly. "Thank you, Kate." When Emily got home, the house was quiet. David was in his office, his laptop open and his shoulders tense. She didn't knock before entering, the folder clutched in her hand. David looked up, startled. "Emily, we need to talk," she said firmly, closing the door behind her. David sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Is this about Alex again?" Emily dropped the folder onto his desk. "It's about everything. The payments, the case, the lies. You need to tell me the truth, David. All of it." David stared at the folder, his face pale. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" she shot back. "What matters is that I know. And I'm done playing this game. So start talking." David rubbed his temples, his voice low. "It started with that case, like you said. Alex was part of a group covering up corporate fraud. When the whistleblower came to me, I thought I could help, but I didn't know how deep it went." "Deep enough for someone to disappear?" Emily asked, her voice sharp. David nodded, his gaze haunted. "The whistleblower was scared. He told me people were threatening him, and then one day he just vanished. I went to the authorities, but there wasn't enough evidence. Alex and his group pinned the blame on me, said I'd leaked information that led to the disappearance." Emily felt a surge of anger. "And instead of fighting back, you paid him off?" David's jaw tightened. "I didn't have a choice. Alex has connections, Emily. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd come after you. After the girls." Emily stared at him, her chest heaving. "You should have told me." "I couldn't," David said, his voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to drag you into this." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You already did, David. By lying to me, you dragged me into all of it." David stood, reaching for her, right, but she stepped back. "Emily, please, I'm trying to fix this." "I don't know if you can," she said, her voice trembling. "But you're going to start by being honest. No more secrets." David nodded, his shoulders slumping. I'll tell you everything. I promise. Emily's gaze didn't waver. You'd better. Because if you don't, I will find out myself. The following morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched coffee. David had left early, claiming he had meetings, but she barely registered his words. Her mind was a storm of emotions: betrayal, anger, fear, but above all, determination. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her family was threatened. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was Kate. Mrs. Peterson, Kate said briskly. I've got more information. Can you come by my office? Emily didn't hesitate. Within an hour, she was seated across from Kate, who looked more serious than usual. I pulled some strings and got my hands on old case files, Kate began, placing a stack of documents on the desk. The whistleblower David mentioned, his name was Jason Pierce, and here's where it gets interesting. Jason isn't dead. Emily's eyes widened. What? David said he disappeared. He did, Kate confirmed. But I tracked him down. He's been living under an alias in Seattle for the past 10 years. Looks like he went into hiding, probably out of fear for his life. Emily's heart raced. Why hasn't he come forward? Because coming forward would mean exposing himself to the same people who made him disappear in the first place, Kate said. But if we can convince him to talk, it might be the key to stopping Alex Carter. Emily sat back, processing the revelation. How do we even approach him? I have an address, Kate said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. But I'll be honest with you, this won't be easy. Jason's been off the grid for a reason. He's not going to trust anyone. Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. I'll go. I have to. Later that evening, Emily told David about Jason. His reaction was a mix of shock and guilt. He's alive? David asked, pacing the living room. After all this time? Yes, Emily said firmly. And we're going to find him. If he's willing to talk, we can put an end to this. David stopped and turned to her, his face pale. Emily, this is dangerous. If Alex finds out, I don't care, she interrupted. We can't keep running, David. This is our chance to take control. David hesitated, then nodded. All right, but I'm going with you. The drive to Seattle was tense. David kept glancing at Emily, as if searching for the right words to say, but she wasn't in the mood for small talk. Her focus was on Jason Pierce and the hope that he could provide the answers they desperately needed. When they arrived at the modest apartment complex where Jason was supposedly living, Emily's nerves kicked into overdrive. She and David stood outside the door, the number etched into her mind. You ready? David asked, his voice low. Emily nodded, then knocked. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing a thin man with tired eyes and unkempt hair. He looked at them suspiciously. Jason Pierce? Emily asked. The man's eyes narrowed. Who's asking? My name is Emily Peterson, she said quickly. This is my husband, David. We know about what happened 10 years ago and we need your help. Jason's expression darkened. I don't know what you're talking about. You've got the wrong guy. Please, Emily said, stepping closer. We're not here to hurt you. We just need the truth. Alex Carter has been blackmailing my husband, so he's dragging our family into this, and we need to stop him. At the mention of Alex's name, Jason flinched. His gaze darted down the hallway as if expecting someone to appear. You shouldn't have come here, he hissed. If Alex finds out, he already knows where we are, David said, his voice steady. This is our only chance to fight back. Please, Jason, you have no idea what's at stake. Jason hesitated, his hand tightening on the door. Then, with a resigned sigh, he opened it wider. Fine, but make it quick. Inside, the apartment was sparse but clean, with a worn couch and a small table stacked with newspapers. Jason motioned for them to sit. I've been hiding for 10 years, he began, his voice heavy. I knew too much. Alex and his people made sure I understood what would happen if I ever spoke out. What did you know? Emily asked. Jason rubbed his hands together, his expression haunted. The company I worked for was laundering money, millions of dollars, through shell corporations. Alex was one of the middlemen. When I found out, I went to David. I thought he could help me expose them. But then, he trailed off, shaking his head. Then you disappeared, David said softly. Jason nodded. I had no choice. They were watching me, threatening my family. So, I ran. Emily leaned forward, her voice urgent. Jason, we need proof, something we can take to the authorities. Jason hesitated, then stood and disappeared into the bedroom. When he returned, he was holding a battered laptop. This has everything, he said, setting it on the table. Emails, bank records, names. It's why they wanted me gone. David stared at the laptop, a mixture of relief and dread in his eyes. This could change everything. Jason nodded grimly. It could also get you killed. Emily's stomach twisted, but she squared her shoulders. We're not backing down. Not anymore. As they left Jason's apartment, laptop in hand, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air in the car was heavy as Emily and David drove back from Jason's apartment. The battered laptop sat on Emily's lap like a ticking bomb, filled with secrets that could either save them or destroy everything. Emily glanced at David, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Do you think it's enough? She asked quietly. David didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the road. If what Jason says is true, it's more than enough. But getting this to the right people without tipping off Alex is going to be tricky. Emily frowned, her fingers brushing over the laptop. Do you think he knows we've been to Jason? David's jaw tightened. If he doesn't already, he will soon. Alex has eyes everywhere. As if on cue, Emily's phone buzzed in her purse. She fished it out and stared at the screen. The number was unknown, but she had a sinking feeling who it was. Don't answer that, David said quickly, his voice sharp. Emily ignored him and swiped to accept the call. Hello? Mrs. Peterson, Alex's voice drawled, calm but menacing. I hear you've been busy. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay composed. I don't know what you're talking about. Alex chuckled darkly. Don't insult me, Emily. I know you visited Jason Pierce. That was a bold move, but it was a mistake. Leave us alone, she said, her voice trembling. This is over, Alex. Oh, it's far from over, he replied. You're playing a dangerous game. You should know by now I don't lose. The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked at David, her breath shallow. He knows. David slammed his fist against the steering wheel. Damn it! I told you not to answer. We couldn't have avoided this forever, she shot back. At least now we know he's watching. They drove the rest of the way in tense silence, each lost in their thoughts. Henceslin. When they finally reached home, Emily locked all the doors and pulled the curtains shut. The sense of security she once felt in their suburban haven was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear. David set the laptop on the dining table, powering it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a desktop cluttered with folders labeled with cryptic names. Let's see what we've got, he said, his voice low. Emily sat beside him, watching as he clicked through the files. Emails, spreadsheets, scanned documents, all damning evidence of the money laundering operation Jason had described. Names of shell corporations, bank account numbers, even messages implicating Alex directly. This is it, David said, his tone grim. This is the proof we need. But how do we use it without putting Jason and ourselves at risk? Emily asked. David sighed, leaning back in his chair. We need someone who can take this and run with it. Someone who can expose Alex without him tracing it back to us. Emily thought for a moment. What about Kate? She's smart, connected. If anyone can figure out how to handle this, it's her. David nodded. It's worth a shot, but we need to be careful. If Alex suspects we're working with someone, he won't hesitate to come after them. Later that night, they met with Kate in a quiet diner, far from prying eyes. She listened intently as David explained what they had found, her expression growing more serious by the minute. This is explosive, Kate said, flipping through a few of the files on her laptop. If we handle this right, it could bring Alex down for good, but it also puts a target on your backs. We don't have a choice, Emily said firmly. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. Kate nodded, her sharp gaze meeting Emily's. All right, I'll take care of this. I know a journalist who's been looking into Alex for years. If we can get this to him, he'll know what to do. Can we trust him? David asked. We don't have a better option, Kate replied. But you two need to lay low. Don't do anything to draw attention to yourselves. As they left the diner, Emily felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like they might actually have a way out. But as they drove home, the feeling was quickly replaced by unease. When they pulled into the driveway, Emily noticed something that made her blood run cold. The porch light was off, a small detail, but one that didn't sit right. She grabbed David's arm as he reached for the door handle. Wait, she whispered. Something's wrong. David frowned, looking around. Stay here, he said, his voice low. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a flashlight. Be careful. Emily said, her heart pounding. David approached the house cautiously, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he reached the door, he stopped. The lock was scratched, the door slightly ajar. Emily, he called, his voice tight. Stay in the car. Emily's stomach churned as she watched him push the door open and step inside. Emily stepped into the house cautiously, her heart pounding. The air inside was unnervingly still, but the disarray was impossible to miss. Drawers were pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. Picture frames lay shattered, and the distinct metallic scent of something overturned filled the air. David was already moving through the house, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. They weren't just looking for something, David said, his voice tight. This was a message. Emily's stomach churned. What kind of message? David paused in the living room, staring at the coffee table. On it sat a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. He picked it up and read the words scrawled in bold, jagged handwriting. Stop digging, or next time it won't just be your house. Emily felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. They know we have the files, David nodded grimly. We need to call Kate. She needs to know this is bigger than we thought. Emily's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, dialing Kate. The line clicked, and Kate's no-nonsense voice came through. Emily? What's going on? They broke into the house, Emily said, her voice shaking. They left a note. They know we have the files. There was a pause on the other end before Kate's voice came back, calm but firm. You need to leave. Now. Pack what you can and get out of there. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not even me. Where are we supposed to go? Emily asked, panic creeping into her voice. I'll set something up, Kate said. But you have to trust me. Just get out of there before they come back. David hung up and turned to Emily. She's right. We can't stay here. They moved quickly, throwing clothes and essentials into bags while keeping an ear out for any sound outside. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, even though the street outside appeared empty. As they packed, Emily noticed Sophie's favorite stuffed animal lying on the floor amidst the mess. She picked it up, her chest tightening. How would she explain this to the girls? How could she keep them safe when the danger was so close? David's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Emily, are you ready? She nodded, gripping the stuffed animal tightly. What about the files? David tapped his laptop bag. I've got them. We'll hand them off to Kate's contact as soon as we can. They loaded the car in tense silence, every shadow on the quiet street feeling like a threat. As they pulled out of the driveway, Emily glanced back at the house, her chest tightening. It no longer felt like home, just another battleground in Alex Carter's game. Driving through the empty streets, Emily finally broke the silence. What if this doesn't end, David? What if we can't stop him? David's grip on the steering wheel tightened. We'll stop him. We have to. Emily turned her gaze out the window, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to protect her daughters, but she felt powerless. The realization stung. No matter how strong her resolve, they were up against something far bigger than themselves. An hour later, they arrived at a motel on the edge of town. It was small and unremarkable, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. David checked them in while Emily sat in the car, her eyes scanning the parking lot for anything suspicious. When they finally entered the room, Emily sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. David sat beside her, his head in his hands. What do we do now? She asked softly. David looked up, his eyes heavy with guilt. We give Kate what she needs and hope she can get it into the right hands. After that, we fight, no matter what. Emily reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. We can't let him win. David nodded, his jaw set. We won't. That night, Emily barely slept. Every creak of the motel walls and every distant car engine made her heart race. She clung to Sophie's stuffed animal, a small reminder of why she couldn't give up. As dawn broke, her phone buzzed with a text from Kate. We're moving forward. Be ready. Emily stared at the message, a mix of fear and determination swelling in her chest. They were running out of time, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't let Alex Carter tear her family apart. The first rays of dawn crept through the thin curtains of the motel room, casting a pale light over the cramped space. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her phone gripped tightly in her hand, rereading Kate's text. Each word felt like a ticking clock, pushing her closer to an inevitable confrontation. David stirred beside her, his face drawn and weary. What did she say? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. She's moving forward, Emily replied, her tone flat. She said to be ready. David sat up, rubbing his hands over his face. We're running out of time. Emily nodded, her chest tightening. We need to be one step ahead of Alex, but he's everywhere. I don't know how we're supposed to stay safe. David's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He reached for it cautiously, his expression darkening as he read the screen. What is it? Emily asked. A message from an unknown number, David said, his voice low. He held the phone out for her to see. The text read, You can't hide forever. Hand over the files, or your family pays the price. Emily felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. He's taunting us. He knows we're not at the house anymore. David set the phone down with a sharp exhale. We can't let him scare us into stopping. Kate's contact will take the files, and then it's out of his hands. But what if it's not? Emily said, her voice trembling. What if he comes after us anyway? After the girls? David leaned forward, gripping her hands tightly. We'll protect them, Emily. Whatever it takes. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Emily's heart pounded as David stood, motioning for her to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It's Kate, he said, unlocking the door. Kate stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the room. You weren't followed? She asked. We don't think so, David replied. But Alex knows we're on the move. Kate nodded grimly, pulling a small flash drive from her pocket. We don't have time to waste. Transfer the files onto this. My contact is meeting me in 2 hours. David retrieved the laptop and quickly began transferring the data. Emily hovered nearby, her anxiety building with each passing second. Do you really think this will stop him? She asked Kate. Kate met her gaze, her expression serious. It's our best shot. Alex thrives on fear and leverage. If we take away his power, he'll have nothing left to hold over you. And if it doesn't work, Emily pressed. Then we deal with it, Kate said firmly, but one step at a time. The transfer completed, and David handed the flash drive to Kate. This has everything. If your contact can't use it, we're out of options. Kate tucked the drive into her bag. He'll use it. You just need to keep your heads down until we know it's safe. As Kate left, Emily felt a knot of tension in her chest. The files were no longer their responsibility, but the danger still felt closer than ever. She turned to David, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this isn't enough? What if Alex doesn't stop? David pulled her into his arms, his embrace strong but shaky. Then we keep fighting. We've come too far to back down now. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. She paced the motel room, her nerves fraying with every passing minute. By evening, Kate called. The files are in my contact's hands, she said. But we have a problem. Emily's heart dropped. What kind of problem? Alex knows, Kate said grimly. Someone tipped him off. He's already making moves to discredit the evidence. How? David demanded, grabbing the phone from Emily. The files are airtight. Doesn't matter, Kate replied. He's throwing everything he has at this to muddy the waters. It's going to be a fight. Emily sat down heavily, her hands shaking. What do we do now? Stay put, Kate said. Let me handle this. But be prepared. If Alex feels cornered, he might come after you directly. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Emily looked at David, her fear mirrored in his eyes. This isn't over, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. David nodded, his jaw set. Not even close. The motel room felt stifling, the air thick with tension. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clock on the nightstand as its red numbers ticked forward. Every second felt like an eternity. David was pacing the room, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his jaw clenched tight. We can't just sit here and wait, he finally said, his voice cutting through the silence. What else can we do? Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Kate said to stay put. If we move, we could lead Alex straight to us. David stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes dark with frustration. And if Alex finds us here? What then? Emily didn't have an answer. The thought had been gnawing at her since the moment Kate left with the files. No matter how far they ran, Alex always seemed to be one step ahead. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Emily's heart pounded as David motioned for her to stay back. He approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed slightly. It's Kate, he said, unlocking the door. Kate stepped inside, her face drawn and serious. She closed the door quickly behind her, locking it. We've got a bigger problem, she said without preamble. Emily stood, her stomach twisting. What now? Kate set her bag on the small table and pulled out her laptop. Alex isn't just trying to discredit the files, he's retaliating. He's making it personal. David frowned. What do you mean? Kate pulled up an email and turned the screen toward them. It was a message from Alex, forwarded by her contact. The subject line read, Leverage. He's threatening to release private information about you both, Kate said. Your finances, your marriage, even the girls. He's trying to scare you into backing down. Emily felt a cold chill run down her spine. He can't do that. He wouldn't. Kate looked at her, her expression grim. He would, and he will, unless we act fast. David's fists clenched at his sides. What do we do? Kate leaned back, her sharp eyes scanning them both. We need to hit him where it hurts. The files were a good start, but they're not enough. Alex has people on his payroll, judges, lawyers, even law enforcement. If we're going to take him down, we need more than evidence. We need to expose him publicly. Emily shook her head. How do we do that without putting ourselves and the girls in even more danger? Kate hesitated, then said, There's a journalist, someone who's been chasing Alex for years. If we can get him involved, we might have a shot. David narrowed his eyes. And why hasn't this journalist brought Alex down already? Because Alex is careful, Kate replied. But with the files we have, plus your testimony, it could tip the scales. Emily crossed her arms, her mind racing. How do we know we can trust this journalist? Kate sighed. You don't. But right now, he's your best option. David glanced at Emily, his face etched with worry. What do you think? Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to push past her fear. We can't keep running. If this is the only way to end it, then we have to try. Kate nodded. Good. I'll set up a meeting. As Kate worked, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. She looked at David, his face grim as he stared out the window. Do you think we're doing the right thing? She asked quietly. David turned to her, his eyes softening. I don't know, but we don't have a choice. The meeting was set for that evening at a nondescript cafe on the outskirts of town. Kate insisted they take separate cars and arrive at staggered times to avoid drawing attention. Emily's nerves were frayed as she and David sat in the car, waiting for their turn to enter. Stay close to me, David said, his voice low. If anything feels off, we're leaving. Emily nodded, clutching her purse tightly. Do you think Alex knows? David didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her he was already bracing for the worst. Inside the cafe, Kate was seated at a back booth with a man in his 50s, his sharp features partially hidden behind a pair of glasses. He stood as they approached, extending a hand. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, he said. I'm Jack Conway. Thank you for trusting me. David shook his hand firmly. Let's hope we don't regret it. Jack smiled faintly and motioned for them to sit. Kate's filled me in on the basics, but I need to hear it from you. What exactly are we dealing with? Emily hesitated, her throat dry. She glanced at David, who gave her a small nod. Alex Carter, she began. He's been blackmailing my husband for months, and now he's threatening our family. Jack listened intently, taking notes as they spoke. When they finished, he leaned back, his expression serious. This is big, he said. But if we're going to take him down, you need to be prepared for the fallout. People like Alex don't go down quietly. Emily swallowed hard. We're prepared. We just want this to end. Jack nodded. Then let's get to work. The cafe's dim lighting seemed to amplify the tension at the table. Jack Conway leaned forward, his notebook open in front of him. Emily sat stiffly in her chair, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse, while David kept glancing at the door as if expecting Alex Carter to burst through at any moment. Jack's voice broke the silence. If we're going to do this, we need to act quickly. Alex has a network of people who will try to bury this story the moment they catch wind of it. What exactly do you need from us? David asked, his tone clipped. Your story, Jack replied simply. Not just the files or the facts. People connect with emotions, with what's at stake. They need to see the faces of the victims. That's how we take away his power. Emily's breath caught. You want us to go public? Jack nodded. It's the best way. If you're anonymous, it's too easy for him to spin the narrative, to make it seem like this is a baseless attack. But if you step forward, tell your story directly, it'll be much harder for him to dismiss. Emily exchanged a glance with David. And what happens to us if we do? What happens to our daughters? Jack's face softened. I won't lie to you. There's risk involved. Alex will come at you with everything he has. But if we do this right, his network will crumble before he has the chance. David leaned back, crossing his arms. What about protection? If we go public, he's not going to sit back and watch. I've already contacted some trusted law enforcement officers, Jack said. They're ready to step in the moment the story goes live. But you need to understand, this will disrupt your lives. Are you prepared for that? Emily's voice was quiet but firm. We don't have a choice anymore. Jack nodded, his respect for her evident. All right, let's start with the basics. I'll need you to recount everything. How it began, what he's done, and what you've discovered. For the next 2 hours, Emily and David laid everything out. Emily spoke about the first envelope, the photograph, and the growing fear that had consumed their lives. David detailed his history with Alex, his mistakes, and the extortion that had spiraled out of control. Jack took meticulous notes, his questions sharp and precise. And the files you gave to Kate's contact, are you confident they contain enough evidence to corroborate your claims? David nodded. They're airtight. Bank records, correspondence, names, dates, it's all there. Jack closed his notebook, his expression thoughtful. This is more than enough to get the story started. I'll write the article and circulate it to my editors tonight. If they approve, it'll be live by morning. Emily's chest tightened. That soon? Jack gave her a small smile. The sooner we act, the less time Alex has to react. Once it's public, his options become much more limited. As they prepared to leave, Jack stopped them at the door. One last thing. Once this goes live, you need to be ready for anything. Alex is going to panic, and desperate people do dangerous things. We understand, David said, his voice steady. Jack handed them a business card. Call me if anything happens. I'll keep you updated. Outside, the air was cool and crisp, but Emily felt none of its relief. She and David walked to the car in silence, each lost in their thoughts. As they started the drive back to the motel, Emily finally spoke. Do you think we're doing the right thing? David kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. I don't know, but at least we're doing something. When they reached the motel, the stillness inside felt suffocating. Emily paced the room, her nerves fraying with every passing second. David sat at the small table, staring at his phone. Hours later, the silence was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Emily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. David motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door cautiously. Who is it? He called out. It's Kate, came the reply, her voice calm but urgent. David opened the door, and Kate stepped inside quickly, locking it behind her. Her expression was grim. Jack's article just went live, she said, pulling out her phone. But there's already a problem. Emily's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Kate handed her the phone. The article pulled up on the screen. The headline was bold and damning, exposing Alex Carter's network in detail. But the comment section below was filled with accusations, insults, and claims that Emily and David were lying. He's counterattacking, Kate said. He's using bots, fake accounts, anything he can to discredit you. David swore under his breath. What do we do now? Kate's eyes hardened. We push back. The truth is out there, and Alex knows it. We just have to make sure it sticks. Emily set the phone down, her fear giving way to determination. Then let's make sure it does. The night dragged on like an eternity, with Emily and David glued to their phones, refreshing the article over and over. The comments section was a battlefield, a mix of support and vitriol. Emily's stomach churned at the sight of some of the accusations, people claiming they were fabricating everything for attention or money. David stood by the window, his silhouette tense against the faint glow of the streetlights outside. He peered through the curtains, scanning the parking lot, as if expecting Alex's henchmen to materialize out of the shadows. Do you think they'll come for us? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned, his face hard. If Alex feels cornered, he might. We need to be ready for anything. A knock on the door made them both jump. Emily's heart slammed in her chest as David signaled for her to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It's Kate, he said, relief evident in his voice. He unlocked the door, and Kate slipped inside, carrying a laptop bag. Sorry for the late visit, Kate said, setting her bag on the table. But things are escalating fast. Jack's article is getting traction, but Alex isn't backing down. Emily moved closer. What do you mean? Kate pulled out her laptop and opened it, showing them a flurry of social media posts and news articles. He's using his connections to spin the story. Half the media outlets are calling it a smear campaign, saying Jack fabricated the evidence. But there's something else. She clicked on a video link. It was a grainy recording, clearly taken from a security camera. The footage showed David in what looked like a heated argument with Alex in a parking lot. When was this? David asked, his brow furrowing. Last year, Kate replied. But Alex is claiming this was from last week, saying you were trying to bribe him to keep quiet. That's a lie, David exclaimed, pacing the room. I haven't seen him in months. Of course it's a lie, Kate said, but he's planting seeds of doubt. If this gains traction, it could weaken our case. Emily sat down heavily, her head in her hands. What do we do? How do we fight this? Kate's eyes narrowed. We fight fire with fire. We release more evidence. The files Jason gave us have details that Alex hasn't addressed yet. We leak those to the press. But won't that put Jason in even more danger? Emily asked. It might, Kate admitted. But Jack is already working to secure Jason's location. If we don't act now, Alex will bury us before we have the chance. David nodded. Do it. Release everything. Kate hesitated. There's one more thing you need to know. Alex's people are watching your family. I got a tip tonight. Someone was seen near your daughter's school. Emily's blood ran cold. What? Are they okay? They're fine, Kate assured her. I've already arranged for extra security to watch over them, but this is his way of sending a message. He wants you to know he's still in control. Emily stood, her hands shaking. He's not in control. Not anymore. Kate gave her a nod of approval. Good, because it's going to take that kind of resolve to see this through. The next morning, Jack published another article, this one filled with damning new evidence. It detailed Alex's offshore accounts, his connections to corrupt officials, and even text messages between Alex and his accomplices. The media firestorm reignited, this time with more force. Emily and David watched the news coverage from the motel room, their phones buzzing with messages from Kate and Jack. Support began pouring in from unexpected places. Former victims of Alex's schemes who were finally willing to speak out. But the reprieve was short-lived. That evening, Emily's phone buzzed with a new message. It was a video sent from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart sinking as she recognized the scene. It was footage of their daughters at school, laughing and playing on the playground. The message that followed was simple. Stop now, or they won't be safe for long. Emily's hands shook as she showed the video to David. His face darkened with fury. That's it. We're done playing defense. What are you going to do? Emily asked, her voice trembling. David grabbed his phone and dialed. I'm calling Jack. It's time to go public ourselves. We're putting our faces to this story. David, are you sure? Kate asked, her expression serious. David's eyes burned with determination. This ends now. Alex doesn't get to control us anymore. Kate nodded, reaching for her phone. I'll set it up. But once you go public, there's no turning back. As they prepared for the interview, Emily felt a mix of fear and resolve. She thought of her daughters, of the life they'd built, and of everything Alex had tried to take from them. We're going to win this, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. David placed a hand on her shoulder. Together, the television camera was trained on Emily and David as they sat side by side in the small, sterile studio. Bright lights glared down on them, and Emily could feel the sweat forming at the back of her neck. Across from them, the interviewer adjusted his notes, his expression a careful mix of professionalism and curiosity. This is your chance, Kate had told them earlier. Be honest, be compelling. Let people see the truth. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers clasped tightly around David's hand. He gave her a reassuring squeeze, though his own tension was palpable. They had spent the night rehearsing what they would say, but now that the moment had arrived, the weight of it felt suffocating. The interviewer cleared his throat and began. Tonight, we bring you the story of a suburban family caught in the crosshairs of a criminal empire. Emily and David Peterson have come forward with allegations that Alex Carter, a known figure in the world of corporate corruption and organized crime, has been targeting them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having us, David said, his voice steady but low. Emily nodded, forcing a small smile. We just want people to know the truth. The interviewer leaned forward slightly. Let's start at the beginning. How did all of this start for you? Emily swallowed hard, her voice shaking as she began. It started with an envelope. A man showed up at our house one evening with a photograph of my husband. He claimed to know things about David's past, things I didn't understand at the time. But it quickly became clear that this wasn't just about the past. It was about control. David took over, his tone measured but firm. Alex Carter was part of a case I worked on years ago. I didn't realize then how dangerous he was or how far he would go to silence anyone who threatened him. When I refused to do what he wanted, he turned his sights on my family. The interviewer nodded, his eyes narrowing. And what has the impact been on your lives? Emily's throat tightened as she spoke. He's threatened our safety, our children. He's used fear as a weapon, trying to make us feel powerless, but we refuse to let him win. The interviewer glanced at his notes before asking the next question. You've provided substantial evidence of Alex Carter's illegal activities. Why do you think he's been able to operate unchecked for so long? Because he's smart, David said bluntly. And because he's protected by people in positions of power. He's spent years building a network of allies who look the other way, who help him cover his tracks. And what do you hope to achieve by coming forward now? The interviewer asked. Emily's voice grew stronger as she replied. We want to expose him for who he really is. We want justice, not just for us, but for everyone he's hurt. The interview continued, with Emily and David recounting the threats, the extortion, and the break-in at their home. The interviewer showed clips of the evidence provided by Jack, including bank records and intercepted communications that implicated Alex in numerous crimes. As the segment aired live, the reaction was immediate. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Emily and David, and news outlets began picking up the story. But even as they watched the tide of public opinion begin to shift, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Alex wouldn't go down without a fight. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Kate. Stay where you are. He knows. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She showed the message to David, her hands trembling. Kate says he knows, she whispered. David's expression hardened. Then we don't leave the studio until we know it's safe. Moments later, Jack burst into the green room, his face pale. We've got a problem. What is it? David asked. Alex is on the move, Jack said. My sources say he's panicking. He knows his network is crumbling, and he's desperate. He might try something reckless. Emily felt a surge of fear, but she pushed it down. What do we do? Security is already on high alert, Jack said. But you need to be prepared. He could try to retaliate. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew unbearable. Emily clung to David's hand, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Then, just as her nerves threatened to break, the door opened and Kate entered. It's over, she said, a small smile breaking through her otherwise serious demeanor. What do you mean? David asked, his brow furrowing. Alex tried to flee, Kate explained. But he didn't get far. Law enforcement intercepted him on the way to the airport. He's in custody. Emily felt her knees weaken, and she sank into a chair. It's over? Kate nodded. It's over. And with the evidence we've provided, he won't be able to talk his way out of this. David let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. He turned to Emily, pulling her into his arms. We did it, he whispered. Emily closed her eyes, letting the weight of the past weeks finally lift. They had faced their worst fears and come out stronger.